Today, we'll start a new series about the Ten Commandments. And I was thinking about my relationship with rules during my life. When I was a teenager, I joined the Boy Scout scouting program for about 3 years. However, I decided to leave because the focus was more on the rules than on personal progress. I already was living in a quite legalistic environment full of you must not do this, you must not do that. And for me, adding other rules felt really heavy. Even though I have very good memories of the camps, other things that we did at the time. And so during my life, yes, the relationship with rules, there were highs and lows. Each one of us, if we think, have different relationships with that. There are some of us who love rules, programs, having things well defined. While, there are part of us that they have difficulty with rules, especially when we don't understand why we have to follow that rule. We are having the same problem right now. I teach in a school. There is the rule now that you cannot use the cell phone. It is very hard because when you go in the class, they ask you why we can do that. The last year, it was in some way allowed. And when you say, no, you can do that now, they ask, now you have to explain me why. And so it's not easy. It's not easy when we face rules. We have to follow rules. And sometimes the same thing happens with commandments contained in the Bible, because we may think, I am Francesco. Life is already complicated. Why do we have to add more rules? Or why take away my freedom, pleasure, joy? In our culture, in Italian culture, it's very common to listen this kind of statements. But why talk about commandments if they are in the Old Testament? With Jesus, didn't everything change? And so there are several reasons why we might see things this way. And it might simply depend also on the meaning we give to the word commandments. Like a list of don't do this, don't do that. But in Hebrew, however, the word we translate as commandments, davar, can have different translations. Can be word, speech, important matter, event, promise, and also commandment. And so if we look at the entire biblical context, we will see that the commandments are actually a fundamental part of the dialogue that God has had with humanity starting from creation. So they are therefore 10 words. There are 10 declarations that the Lord makes to teach man how to live according to his true nature, as sons and daughters of God, and that describe also God's character. But if we go and see in the Bible, we will see that God had already spoken 10 creative words. If we read Genesis 1, we find 10 times the expression God said. you know, the first one was God said, let there be light. Okay, thank you. So 10 words that from nothing make everything exist. Light, heaven, earth, plants, animals, and man. And so every word of God creates life, order, and beauty. So God begins a dialogue with humanity already in the Garden of Eden, inviting men to trust Him, to live in a relationship of love and trust, not in a regime of arbitrary prohibitions. So in this dialogue, God helps us understand from the beginning some fundamental things. What are they? We can see. Okay, the first one, that life originates from His creative word. The second one is that we are made to live in a relationship of trust with Him, and that our identity is founded on being His sons and daughters. But it is right in that garden that something changes radically. We remember the story when the serpent whispers, as God really said, and after that, everything breaks apart. And so, with that doubt, those three fundamental truths become completely distorted. Okay? And so, what changed with the fall? So first one, instead of recognizing that life comes from God's word, we begin to believe that we must create life by ourselves. So we no longer trust that God is the source of every good thing. But we think, I must manage by myself, I must control, I must provide for my own happiness. And instead of living a relationship of trust, what we do? We hide. And so, like Adam and Eve behind the trees, we also hide behind our masks, our performances, and we know also the fear of judgment. Shame has replaced intimacy. And the third point, instead of founding our identity on being God's children, what we do? We look for it elsewhere. In work, in success, in relationships, in our results. We become slaves of what we think about ourselves or what others think about us. And here, sin hardens everything. Our heart becomes like stone, rigid, cold, unable to receive God's life and love. And so, I don't know if you can see these patterns in your life. Where are we trying to create in our life instead of receiving it from God? What are we hiding from for fear of being rejected? What are we founding our identity on today? So the fall broke the dialogue of love, but the story does not end here, because God never gives up. Even after sin, He continues to call us, to desire to have this kind of dialogue. We can see also in the garden, there is this question, where are you? This is not an interrogation of an angry commander, okay? But it's the heartbroken cry of a sad father. God obviously knew where they were, but he also knew that a void had been created between him and man, a void that he himself would have to fill. And even though as humanity we have moved away from God, he has not given up. He continues to speak words of promise. So we can see in the Bible that he calls Abraham with a blessing that we reach all the families of the earth. And when Israel in Egypt cries out from slavery, God comes down to free them. I have seen the affliction of my people. I have come down to deliver them. So the pattern is always the same. God speaks to open the future, not to close it. His words free, they do not imprison. Grace comes before law. And so the 10 words of Sinai follow the same logic. They are not like a foreign addition, but the natural part of what God had always done. Create, call, and free. And also we have to remember that they reflect his character, his love for humanity, his faithfulness, and also his desire that we flourish in fullness. And you know, when we see things in that way, really everything changes. And so we arrive at the key point. We have talked about dialogue and relationship, and also about God's desire to reconnect that conversation interrupted in the garden. So look at what we read in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, full of grace and truth. So Jesus is that Word that God has always wanted to speak. Not a rule written on stone, but a person who walks with us, who speaks to us face to face. If God in the garden walked with Adam and even the cool of the day, now in Jesus he comes to walk with us again. And so the dialogue becomes flesh, becomes lived life. And think, Jesus did not come to cancel the commandments, but to show us how they are really lived, when they are no longer just external rules, but life. Okay? Life that flows from within. And we can read that in the following verse. Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish, thank you, the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So Jesus fulfills the law in himself, living, dying, and rising again. But it is the Spirit who fulfills it in us, writing it in our hearts and transforming us from within. So you see, at Sinai, God wrote the law on tablets of stone for a people with hearts of stone, hard and resistant. But through Jesus, the Spirit removes that heart of stone and gives us a heart of flesh, alive, sensitive, where the law is no longer an external burden, but an inner desire of love and freedom. So these 10 words, these 10 declarations are not rules created on the spot. They reflect a universal morality written in the human heart from the beginning, like a natural sense of right and wrong that says, do not kill, do not steal, be honest. That are principles that all culture recognize because they come from God himself. For Israel, they become the founding document of a nation under God, a covenant that reveals his holiness and our sin, but also the way to forgiveness and blessing. And so in the New Testament, Jesus fulfills and elevates them, showing us that they are not a burden, but an eternal guide to live in freedom and love. All this brings us to the crucial moment when we are in Exodus. So let us enter in this dramatic scene where God speaks these words of freedom for the first time. So we can read now in Exodus 19, so we can understand better what was happening. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now, Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln. Okay. And the whole mountain trembled greatly. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. So you can see this incredible scene at the foot of Sinai. After 3 months of desert, people freed from slavery that had the opportunity to see great miracles stands before the mountain, and hearts beat fast, and also fear and wonder together. So this is an overwhelming encounter with the Holy God. And God speaks, not to crush the former slaves, but to seal a covenant and form them as children. To form them as children. As a dialogue with your child. And so in this atmosphere of holy fear, God speaks his first words that we know will change everything. So, now I ask you to read with me the first 3 verses, because your accent is a little bit better than mine. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Oh, sorry. You shall no other. Okay. So, let's go to verse 2. And the question is, why do the 10 Commandments begin with God introducing himself? Because everything he wants from us is not just a random list of rules, but comes directly from what he is, from his good and righteous character. And so when he says, your God, it is as he speaks directly to each one of us. Is speaking to you, is speaking to me. Is not a generic and distant God, but someone who wants to have a personal relationship with every single person and with all the people together. In practice, he's saying, it is I, your God, close to you. And I think that this is one of the fundamental questions that each one of us should ask. Is he my God, or the God of my culture, of my family, the God of my wife, the God of my husband? And so everything starts from slavery. Why? Because the people of Israel have been freed from slavery in Egypt, but in the same way, many of us have been freed from slavery of sin, and like the Hebrew people, had no merit for what God had done for them. Neither do we. So, we can see that it was through that liberation that we come to know our deliverer by pure grace. And we can read in Colossians 1:13 to 14, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness, and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So it's like a father who frees his son from prison and then teaches him not to fall back into chains. Grace comes before law. It is not obey to be saved, but you are saved now. Live as a free child. And so, for this very reason, the first word is, you shall have no other gods before me. So the question is, but who were these other gods that the first commandment speaks of? Okay. Oops, did not upload, sorry. Egypt, from which Israel had just come out, had more than 2,000 different gods. And so I was talking with another brother. He was telling me probably they have also in their tents mini idols and things that they were bringing with them. Also because it's very interesting how the system of idols and gods was in Egypt. They had big gods for the whole country, but they have also different gods for every town. And so they worshipped these gods for many different reasons. They were for, wealth or to be saved from something different. And so you had only just to choose who was your favorite god, and then you can worship him. And so did these gods really exist? Okay. God's not, but we know also about the spiritual also war. And so we know also how Satan can use these kind of things to take people. And so another question can be also about the true nature of idols. Because in some way they were tangible symbols of humanity's deepest fears, like death, hunger, and infertility. And also they were distorted expressions of our legitimate desires for security, for protection, and prosperity. But most of all, they were desperate attempts to buy life instead of receiving it as a gift from God. So these idols were nothing other than the extension of the consequences of the fall in the Garden of Eden, when man decided to turn his back on the true God and try to become God to himself. But to really understand why idolatry is so destructive, we must see how it connects with the three consequences of the fall we have already explored. Because I'm not seeing the slides.
Oh, okay, I'll move the slides.
You see the slides? Okay. Do you have another one with green background or not? Or just that?
Yeah, with all the different points.
Okay. Can you, follow that? Sorry. Okay. Next one? Okay. So, first consequence, life. So in the garden, life was a wonderful gift that Adam and Eve received from God. Okay? We can agree with that. So everything was grace. But after the fall, here is the distortion. I must create life by myself. Idolatry becomes the way to do it. We offer sacrifices for crops and for rain. But this denies what? God's grace that wants to give us life. God's grace that wants to give us life as a free gift. And we have a second consequence connected with the relationship. In the garden, there was perfect intimacy. And after sin, they begin to hide behind the trees. And idolatry continues this hiding. We prefer to negotiate with idols that don't really know us, don't judge us. Why? Because it seems safer, okay? But it takes us away from a really true relationship. A third consequence is connected with identity. Because in the garden, identity was clear. Children of God, loved unconditionally. But after the fall, we look for identity elsewhere. In work, in success, and idolatry feeds this. I am what I have, I am what I do, instead of I am what God says about me. And we become slaves of possessions and also performances. So, now can you see, do you understand why idolatry is so serious in God's eyes? It's so serious because idolatry completely denies His grace. God had freed Israel from Egypt by pure grace without merit on their part. But idolatry transforms this relationship of love into a business transaction. Okay? If I do this, I hope that you will do that for me. Okay? And it makes people forget who the true deliverer is. It brings people back into a spiritual slavery, even worse than the physical one. And also we can see in the New Testament that we read that habitual idolatry even excludes from God's kingdom. The stakes are that serious. So, let's go to modern idols, okay? Because we think we are too smart for idolatry, okay? I had many conversations with friends about that. They say, idolatry, what are you talking about? But if you see, we do exactly the same thing with more sophisticated idols. If we talk about money, we can say, if I were rich, I would be happy. So we transform wealth into a guarantee of security. Success. If I get a job, I will have value. And also the opposite. Opposite? Okay. So we make our dignity depend on career, health. If I use medicine and gym, I will be immortal. So we transform hospitals into modern temples of salvation. Relationships. If I find perfect love, I will be complete. So we ask another person to fill the emptiness that only God can fill. And then feelings. If I follow my heart, I will find the way. So we transform emotions into supreme guide. They are all desperate attempts to get what only God can give us. True peace, secure identity, and unconditional love. But like the ancient idols, they promise much, but leave us empty and slaves of anxiety, fear, etc., etc. Okay, etc., etc. But look carefully what this commandment really says. When God says, "You shall have no other gods before me," is not just saying, put me first in your list of values, like at the top, and then you can have the second place, third place, fourth place. No, the Hebrew expression means much more. It means only I am God. There are no others. It is a request for absolute and exclusive faithfulness. It is the recognition of reality. He is the only true God, the only true deliverer. So the commandment calls us to recognize this truth and to live in the grace we have already received in Jesus Christ. So, what is God telling us with his first word? We can see now this kind of message that God is saying. My son, my daughter, I love you more than you can imagine. I have already freed you from slavery, not because of your merits, but by pure grace. Now, Stop looking for life in idols that promise you everything but cannot give you anything. Stop making deals with false gods that always leave you empty and anxious. Come to me. Trust me completely, because if you do, you will be truly free. Free from the fear of not being enough, free from the anxiety of having to control everything, free from the weight of having to earn your value. And so God is saying, I alone am your God. I alone can give you the life you seek, the love you need, the identity that completes you. Have no other gods before me, not because I'm jealous in a petty way, but because I love you too much to see you enslaved to what cannot save you. This is not law, it is love. Come home, my son. Come home, my daughter.